that you have your headphones on if you require translation services. Matin va agus fáiltaíomh go comity call agus bunstreachtar ha gal áte tron deomar seo agus trá Microsoft Teams. Denmh cíneach go bhfuil na microfónú acamh éid agus mustáisiigh sin éidir sin ar hálaithe nuasmóidistem ar tréoracha le fachcail úrnaí agus a chuinú neis go chlára.
Lord our God, we thank you once again that this is where we are found on this day, the beginning of a new day, that we are found on Mercy's ground. Another day in our experience, Lord, and a day closer to eternity. We thank you, Lord, that once again we have an opportunity to make our calling and election sure regarding your salvation. For we are all accountable to thee, Lord, as our Lord and our Master. We thank you, Lord, that you are indeed the rock of our salvation, steadfast and sure. And we thank you, Lord, that we are gathered as we are this day, that we have the health and strength to come together as we are. We remember those who are less fortunate than we are this day, Lord. We especially remember the regions of Syria and Turkey. We remember the Ukraine. O Lord, we pray for peace where there is war. Pray for healing where there is pain. O Lord, we have many circumstances around the world that is above our comprehension. But you are the creator of the universe, Lord. All things are in your hands. We ask that you would bless this council at this time, especially, Lord. Bless the chair of this committee. We thank you for his diligence and all the hard work that he does. We thank you for all the officers, for all the members, with the chief executive, the leader and the convener. O Lord, we thank you that we are in our accountability to our electorate, the responsibility that you give us. O Lord, we pray that we would do all things good in difficult and challenging times. We do not know what a day or an hour may bring, Lord. But teach us, Lord, to understand that here we have no continuing city. That we would do good for our people, Lord, as we come to budget settings in coming days. That all things will be done well. We remember those who are less fortunate than we are, Lord. Remember those who are suffering, those who are sick. And we pray especially, Lord, for the Gillis family who have lost a home in recent weeks. The village of Cremore. We pray, Lord, that you would uphold her and keep her at this time when she has lost her home and all her possessions. Remember Mustafa, our colleague, at this time in the loss of his nephew. We also remember Councillor Norman MacDonald, that you would restore him to full health again, Lord. Oh, Lord, we know that, as we said, we have no continuing city here. Prepare us then for our eternal home. For we see how quickly time goes by. We often think that tomorrow shall come as today, that this afternoon shall come like this morning. But we have no assurance of that, Lord. Let us then put our house in order while we have time to do so, and a saving knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. Go with us now, Lord, in our deliberations on this committee and throughout the day and throughout the weeks ahead. And we ask that all things will be done in good, and pardon us freely for our many sins. Amen.
Bevallen me dasig vaartig je schoon als je hem hoeft, want ik het gewoon weg de comedy call en spunstructor, hij kent de juist gemoedjes. En de dag we sturen naar konje, kun je naar kine naar lennes, maar has je naar bulten comedy als een veerlig terug computer, vaak over camera uit als een microfoon ja. Maar ha afgekeken naar vrije lucht door computer vaak of jij aan daar goed, maar als je wat bij die aasknop figures kist. Goed in een geine wil als afgekeken kan wel systeem veel zijn deelbaar. Als mag ik een garretje in een maat. Als je maak een hier dingen veel je buiten gegaan als bij een gaar oanje naar stad. En nu je likken een garretje sterk maak aardig en maak kutjarak. Havi daar weg derake amsen be. Maar has je verzo'n tilke keest vaak over maakheid, agus maar ha Afrika in op die aas hoorlichen ajaf aan urut de jano. Heb niemals a horste wil a homety. a thuh chláirí ús féimi buil an deomarácail nó clíocha chuide an gáil. Chuoinige go bhfuil a chuniú go chláir agus an dúin na cuniú dhé is fáidir lín na cóla. A fascíh a gá I cúspar a cóg é a cháiricha gan na díabhar. Ba cháirginn pechacha é an náis céin san ólas agus dhearann éit buil ré cára agus cistean a bhí máchar go bhfuil na hán an fascíh a gá an na díabhar. É cúsparan an nuachtaigh thuníoch agus gáíoch a gá an na díabhar ag déidir na cuniú, agus mas tacha sin hé díara ar lup compáist a thulag is an officéid imimechaí agus buil a chuniú ága. Bhuaise sin leis chun I chiad cúspar é a chláir agus sin gearchúndas na cuniú éid dhéiche bhá fiche cin dáhain. En je laat de koinjar le ga lekker lijnen ha mi tek sin. Eis nach a lusse keestig die ka lekker lijnen ga niet wel. A mi is al. Look am lijnen liedje.
Here in the Gaelic translation.
Are the ones online here in the Gaelic translation? Yeah.
Yes.
Ad ka hoinja. At de koude mech uit deel Gaelic uiestig naar gelijk hiana. You Bhuaise sin go gearchúndas na coniú a seo son únda chuig. Iche lá fiche chan dahain. Bhisiú gúnda chuig? Dach bolibh. Gearchúndas coniú haitans in muna bhá díag chan dahain. A seo son fisre chuig. Ris cúspar chláir a gúid, ma úid ag buid an a gúspar san bí é a chláir óprach bechárgaibh sin a chláir. We gaan veel maar een niche boel en dover en je wil het klare oes gusper. Jaren niet boel zijn jou maar zijn een jano en draaste levi a kur een microfoon no a Teams levi a klech en boektig tok a live. Ja nog kindig gewelche ken je me a diest rond gusper en me agus gewelche valenter en glechtig maar ga je wien geroeien. Wordt in je klare oes. Check it.
I'd like to declare an interest in item 9. I work for one of the companies in it. Winter maintenance.
Aye, leave that. Didn't spelen. En hier? Bhuaise in eis go cúspar a céid sin a rianatas ráide trí sealabh spunstreachtar sé a bhís an cóla. A náis seo son fisircha agus dorst hartheala a rúntain heilevis for smach an leis ást offaceid an a daimh comedy call agus spunstreachtar ag ráide trí. Díní colmach cynnig agus daimh mach leochtis an náis agus frictí iad cisten san bí. Colm, Mr. Doshach.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think today with the wind outside that if people are talking and get close to the mics. So I'll try and practice what I preach. Thank you, Chair. So the report you have in front of you just now, I'm not going to go through a lot of details, but I'll just highlight a couple of aspects. One on the finance side of things. The Q3 reports aren't yet available and will be reported at the budget setting meetings. There's no real material change to the budget position in Q2 other than in terms of any predicted overspends. So there are a number of areas where there could be slight overspends, but other areas where we're looking at underspend. So hopefully balancing by the end of the financial year. One of the areas of projected overspend will be winter maintenance. We're looking at potentially an overspend of 500,000 by the end of the financial year. That's basically due to the operational activity that we have had over the season. The other focus for us just now in the department as well is looking to implement the budget savings initiatives that have been highlighted for 23-24. These will be in the budget report at PNR later on. We're also planning for budgeting for 24-25, so there's no letting off the steam and the initiatives on what we need to do for the future. So there is a focus on the coming year, but also the next year in terms of financial planning for the services. You've probably all heard as well that on the Levelling Up Fund that the Coral's applications have been unsuccessful. We're still waiting for feedback on these. For this committee, it's really the transportation application we had for £50 million. So once we get some feedback, we'll look at preparing for round 3 applications. We don't have a timescale for that yet, but we'll keep you informed. And the other topical area just now is on climate change and net zero. We do have an internal focus group looking at what initiatives are out there where we should be positioning ourselves as a Corla and across the Western Isles in terms of climate change, be it mitigation or adaptation. So mitigation is where we would look to reduce our emissions, and adaptations would be to look at where we'd be looking at protecting or adapting our environment to the potential effects of climate change. We're embarking on a programme of work streams and collaboration between other authorities to share an experience and knowledge as to what we need to do in terms of route mapping for net zero, but also really focusing on what funding is out there to actually assist us in whatever mitigation or adaptation measures that we're looking to take. So I'll happy to stop there, and if there's any questions, happy to take them, Chair.
Geistig Dennis B. News Machkara, McGilshire.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not a member of your committee. In regard to the last point that Mr. Mackenzie made in terms of taking action with regard to climate change and such like, we heard yesterday at Sustainable Development that there is a distinct possibility that there will be space on the interconnector. So is it likely that this council will look to projects which might assist it in the future?
I would say at probably at a small scale and probably at a large scale. I can only be confident what we may do small scale in terms of our own infrastructure. And I think we would be looking at our asset base as to how we can take advantage of that extra space to be able to generate on-site power, be it through wind turbines, which probably in a day like this would be, I don't know, do they switch them off on a day like this? But yes, I think that's the kind of thing we'd be looking at on a small scale. I think at Sustainable Development, they're probably looking at the larger scale schemes as to what the council may do on that. But for the interests of this committee and our asset base, I would say we would be making advantage of any additional capacity within the scheme to allow us to develop renewable resources.
Ronald.
Thank you, Chair. I wish to bring to the committee's attention paragraph 11.6 regarding investment in local bridges stock. I noticed within that paragraph there's a mention that construction and remedial costs are increasing significantly, which may require work to be reduced or phased. I wonder, can the Director indicate to the committee which projects within this sphere might be delayed and whether he has any information on how timelines might be affected?
We're currently working on the Lochanob scheme at in Barra. So that looks like it can progress. There've been additional costs on that scheme in terms of services. So the projects that we may have to look at phasing or looking at the scope of works are going to be the North Ford projects, which were the next ones on the list to deal with. We've managed to deal with most of the bridge issues that we've had to date. We will be approaching Scottish Government again in terms of the increased construction costs on the islands. We've done a bit of work as well on the Scalpy Bridge. The total costs of there are looking at coming in near £10 million. We have a budget of approximately £2 million. So we really need to be looking at what we need to do just now and facing these works. And again, where there are shortfalls in budget, seeing if we can take in money from other sources.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Chair. Can I refer to item 11.7 and probably 11.8? It's to do with net zero, climate change, targets. There are realities associated with climate change, and the realities are attached to attaining the targets, and they are costly. Could we get some analysis at some time as to where we are or where we're going in regard to trying to attain this wonderful target of net zero, which I don't think can be attained anyway, but that's the government and higher authorities are imposing this upon us for some reason or other, which some of us cannot understand. But anyway, that's another. But there are the practicalities and realities of getting to net zero. Would you agree, Carla?
Totally.
Absolutely. So, but there are also, they are all costly businesses. It's going to cost this council and it's going to cost individuals a lot of money in order to get to these targets. Would you agree on that?
I would.
Yes, thank you. We're all in agreement. This is good. This is even getting better. So really what we've got to look at is, and these targets are coming on us quickly. Some of them are within 2 to 3 years. Some of them are 4 to 5 years. And the costs are going to be borne by a lot of people, and the cost effect is going to actually impact those who cannot afford it. We'll look at the housing stock we've got, for instance, but in the practical realities of what you're doing here, you're trying to achieve, for instance, electric vehicles. We're trying to do that, whether it's in the cleansing or whether it's in the bus. And I've been talking to some who are actually working within the cleansing and within the bus, and they are saying at the present time, the vehicles are not as good and not as practical as the ones that we have at the moment. We've got problems with these vehicles. We've got problems with charging these vehicles. We've got problems with the amount of time that these vehicles can spend on the road. For instance, cleansing. Is it possible to put electric vehicles into rural Lewis? That's a question for David here. But we have to come to, and I think we should have a paper here detailing actually where we're going and the costs that will be affected by that. Would you agree?
I'm all in agreement with you, and if I can maybe, I mean, there's nothing I'm disagreeing with you on this, and the council does have a strategy document for climate change, and it is in a way looking at what the aspirations are, and at a high level looking at what we need to do. And you're totally right in what you say. We need the detail behind that and the costs to see how we're going to get there. And this is what I mentioned earlier on about route mapping. I don't think there's any authority in Scotland, England, and the UK that really has all the answers to all these dilemmas. there is what are we going to do? What's it going to cost? What does it mean for me? And it's about working our way through that. And that's why we're participating in a number of work streams with other local authorities to share that intelligence. Because no matter how you look at, say, decarbonisation, a domestic heating system, or for the likes of this building, what are the options to us? They're very complex in that the first thing you want to do is you want to retain all the heat that you're actually generating. But then you want to look at how you're generating that heat, and is it from a fossil fuel or is it an alternative? Nobody has the answers. And that's why I can't come to you, or the team can't come to you and say, this is how we're getting there. This is all the answers. This is what it's going to cost. So these work streams we're looking at over the coming months are going to start putting that into a bit of context and hopefully giving yourselves as members more information on a potential way to get there. The money is going to be a big ask. The technology is going to be a big ask, and you've rightly stated that. You know, if you look at the construction industry, if you're trying to decarbonize an excavator, for instance, the technology for electricity doesn't really work to that kind of power demand it needs just now. There are many such questions, and I'm afraid I don't have the answers, but I agree with what you've said.
Yeah, I agree. We're in total agreement. There's no the problem that I have at the present time, and the problem that we all have, is that it's costly, and whether we're going to get vehicles for cleansing or for bus contracts, these vehicles are highly costly, and that therefore is going to be borne out on how much we are going to pay. It's going to, in other words, it's the ordinary citizen that's going to pay through council tax or whatever. So there's, in other words, costs are rising, and therefore it's going to be borne by individuals. And I think that we have to have some strategy, and we've got to make us that strategy rather longer term rather than shorter term.
Like me David na tin stoi gaan draast David na hik a kiste kom for gedraasta.
Just following on from what Councillor McLean was saying, I agree with what he says, but you know, there shouldn't be any duplication. You see, we are a council of which there are 32 in Scotland, so there must be a system in place where one organisation does the thing for all the buildings. There's the health board that'll face similar circumstances on net zero on their buildings. So why are officers of the council going to be tied up when other councils are doing similar? So I would say that, you know, a one size fits all on the public sector, and we shouldn't be incurring additional costs, you know, where others could show us and follow the way on what we need to do, because the buildings need to be insulated to whatever extent. We did discuss this at the Outer Hebrides community planning partnership at the executive group. The health board are already starting work. So if the health board are doing some work on buildings, why don't we just have a look and let them do that rather than, you know, tie up officers' time in doing something similar? So the public sector should get together and make sure that the one size or whatever reports you need to do are suitable for the buildings rather than duplicate work.
Yes, that's the point I made as well. The work streams that we are joining are entirely for that purpose. We're working closely with the Scottish Futures Trust, and they're drawing together like-minded authorities to share that intelligence, share that knowledge. So we're not duplicating the work, but we still need to have the local input into, okay, this is what we have, but then share the knowledge on technology and experience that others are using. So that includes the health board and other public agencies as well. So point taken, and that's our intention, not to reinvent a wheel, so to speak.
Okay, David, hos en ist, da ist doch fick ju histe weg allem dosher. David.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in terms of municipal services for performance management, we are continuing to back to normal services. Really only disruption in the last quarter have been due to bad weather conditions. Over the summer months, we did notice that there was still a higher than expected, or not so much expected now, but there was an increase in waste collected during the summer months. It has settled down again. We are aware that that will impact on our budgets, but we are managing that at the moment. The rollout of the new curbside services to areas of Lewis and Harris, we've started the final phase of the delivery of the bins. So we're in Harris at the moment, and we expect that to be completed by the end of this month. We're looking at April changeover. We had considered changing over route by route, but because of the change to 3 weekly collection that affects all areas of Lewis and Harris, it made more sense for us to manage it as a transition across the whole areas to the same system. So that will happen hopefully in probably towards the end of April. Deliveries of vehicles, it still remains a bit of a problem. Lead times were particularly poor when we placed the orders, but they're now not even meeting these deadlines or predicted deadlines. The hook lift lorries, we're still sort of hoping that they're going to be delivered by the end of March, but it's likely to be put back. The electric RCV, which I'll go on to answer Councillor McLean's question, is late. It's not going to be delivered to the body manufacturer. Chassis is not going to be delivered to the body manufacturer till the middle of February now instead of early January. So it may be April before we get delivery of that. We're still looking at options for the 2025 ban on biodegradable municipal waste for landfill, but other than export, there's not really anything that's saying this is a non-island solution for us, but we continue to explore that with assistance from Zero Waste Scotland. In terms of budgets, as my colleague Callum McKenzie stated, we haven't got the finalised Q3 figures, but we are monitoring our own figures, and we're still predicting that we'll have a balanced output at the end of the year. To go back to the net zero aspects, I suppose I'll start with something positive. We were looking to do something with the landfill gas that's generated at Benidorm. At the moment, it's flared, and at the time when we looked at it, we couldn't get a 50 kilowatt grid connection. So if that opens up in the future, that's something that we would definitely be looking at doing, because that would provide virtually all of the electricity for the site just by one very relatively small connection. So that's definitely something that we will reinvestigate once that becomes available to us. For net zero in terms of both buses and RCVs, the electric RCV, we recognise that there are range limitations, but it should be perfectly adequate for all of the Stornoway and surrounding area routes. It is fully funded at the moment, and we're taking advantage of funding as and when it becomes available to us. So that vehicle in itself will replace a diesel engine vehicle, and it will give us extra capacity on the routes to allow us to roll out these curbside collections. For the areas out with, and by probably, for want of a better term, Greater Stornoway, so Tongue, Newmarket, Marybank, these areas, the electric RCV is perfectly adequate. The areas out with that, we don't expect that electric will provide a sensible solution. We have got one vehicle that runs on a combination of hydrogen and diesel. That allows us to revert to diesel when we don't have hydrogen, and currently we don't. The hydrogen economy hasn't really moved forward quickly enough for us yet, but we're hopeful that we can improve the output of hydrogen at Creed. We've got an electrolyser there, so we're we are working on a funding package to see whether we can get that back up and running. Hydrogen and diesel is a good interim, so almost like a hybrid solution, in that you can reduce your carbon emissions, but you're not introducing a range issue. And obviously we are in the position, say by 2030, where we've got generation of adequate source of locally produced hydrogen, then that's really what we would target for HGVs and buses. We are still looking at electric buses, but with a fairly realistic view on it. Even on the Busnaccorla routes, which only cover Broad Bay, we would expect that we would need at least 2 additional vehicles, and they cost twice as much. So that's, if it was fully funded, it's maybe something that we could do, or at least the differential was funded. The charging infrastructure for us is difficult because if you're running buses on the mainland, you're looking at putting in something like 150 kilowatt super rapid charge as a minimum, but going up to maybe 250 kilowatt or even higher than that, because of the array of batteries and the need to charge them in a short time. What we call rapid chargers with our current grid infrastructure is normally a 50 kilowatt. Now it's only rapid compared to a 22, but the norm now, if you look at off motorway charging stations, for example, even for cars, you're talking about 125 to 175 kilowatt as being what people are putting in, because they want the stationary time to be as low as possible. But for us, that's very unlikely to be achieved. So we are looking at realistically. We see hydrogen as a potential for longer distances, because your refueling times are very, you can refuel a hydrogen vehicle in not much more than 5 minutes. But there is limitation as to where you fuel that, and you're probably restricted to your own refueler. But you can get decent ranges, and it's quick to turn around. The other elements of fleet, cars are getting to the stage where for pool vehicles, they're perfectly adequate. On an overnight charge, you can get, if you're getting over 200-mile range, it'll do a day's work, and then it plugs in overnight, and that works quite well. Vans are lagging behind. We know that the technology for vans seems to be aimed at urban use, and it's not that suitable for us. But happy to take any questions.
David, thanks for your very detailed report there. I've got a couple of questions for you. First of all, the hooklift lorries, once we receive the new ones, will that be us back to our full complement of lorries? And I've got a second question on buses. Moving forward, we heard yesterday at Sustainable Development Committee, we got a presentation from the Stornoway Port Authority about, the development that's going on there, and how many more cruise ships will be coming into the island over the next few years. And the cruise ships are going to have a higher number of passengers than previously. So my question yesterday and today as well about buses, if we have cruise ships coming in, with between 3,000 and 5,000 passengers, there's not enough buses on the island. If or when the Corps are looking at buying new buses, for the service runs, would they consider maybe, trying to tie them in with a cruise ship industry? I know it's not norm, for the Corps to be doing private work like that, but I think it's going to have to come to it, because we just don't have enough buses on the island. I know other islands, for example, Skye, had to take buses from Inverness and Lewis before, but we don't want to be in that situation. But I think there might be an opportunity here for Busnaccorla to get in on the cruise ship business that'll be coming in the next few years. Thank you.
David, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. To address the first question, once the 2 hook lifts arrive, that will be a full complement for that service. We ended up spending a lot of money last year repairing and basically reconditioning the running gear on two of our main heavy use hook lift lorries. That put them out of action for quite a number of months. But that work has greatly improved the reliability. So we've not had the service issues or the cost issues this year as we had last year. Once we get the new ones, these vehicles will become the sort of reserve, because we always have to have reserve vehicles for both planned and unplanned maintenance. So that once the new ones arrive, not only will we have two new vehicles, but should in theory at least be much more reliable, but our reserve vehicles will also be a much higher standard. At the moment, we're running with the ones that we spent quite a lot of money on, but they are doing okay just now, and much older ones as the reserves. And that's very much a weak link, because when we put them to significant levels of use last financial year, they ended up breaking down quite regularly. So we ended up with having to hire in. Moving on to the other question, I think there's probably quite a difference between what Bus na Córna and also our subsidised contracts can do in terms of providing access to vehicles for cruise ships. I think that's a seasonal activity. It's something that if there was a business case, it would probably be better done via the private sector, as is just now. They have the ability to take in vehicles for a shorter season and then put them back in a way that we would struggle through our procurement regime. And I would. It is a sort of business plan that is more likely to be matched up with our local private sector operators than Bus na Córna. But we're always happy to look at opportunities.
David. Paul Finnegan.
Tapliff. I just want to ask something, David, something separate, just really about the skips, just how the replacements of skips is coming along.
David.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Finnegan. It's Mike took a wee while to re-engage. So yeah, we've got all of the skips that have been ordered, either delivered or en route. So we'll just see how we get on. It's always a case of trying to keep as many available as possible. And like most things, we never quite have enough budget to have exactly what we would like, but we've certainly ordered a number, and we should be back to normal for the coming year.
And has that relieves the situation at the recycling plant in Harris, at the recycling site in Harris now? Is it running better now because of that?
As far as I'm aware, it is. I can double check with my colleagues and get back to you directly.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, David. Thanks, man. Cheers.
Okay, Francis.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to ask a question in relation to the zero waste Scotland and the organic bins. And obviously from the leaflet we got, the desire is to have people using their organic bins for food waste as much as possible. I know in some other authorities they provide the green bags, the biodegradable bags, to customers, and I think the system is you get a roll, and then when you down to your last one, you tie it to the handle of your bin the day of your collection, and you get another roll. They are quite expensive. I just wondered if by not providing them, might that be a disincentive for people to actually use the scheme? And obviously we want to try and encourage them to put the food waste in the correct bin. Thank you.
David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We definitely recognise that it would be better if we were able to provide the the bags as part of the service. We're looking at the we have issued vented food waste caddies because they have proved in other areas to be better to use. They don't get sort of soggy the way the sealed ones can, and we've given 2 rows of liners out with that. We will do that throughout the whole of Lewis and Harris, as well as the areas I've got the new bins. If we can generate increased tonnages, then that feeds back. It's a bit of a catch-22. If we get more tonnages, we can afford the bags. If we get less tonnages, then it becomes harder to justify the cost of the bags. It is something that across Scotland that there needs to be a better campaign from Zero Waste Scotland to make people aware just of the difference that makes to the climate. Food waste is fairly significant in terms of carbon emissions. It makes up a high percentage, but as a sort of general rule of thumb, the participation rates in areas that have food waste collection is probably not much more than 20 to 25%. I think we're probably not quite as, not as bad as that, but there is definitely a potential for improvement, and it is something that we can process locally. We're trying to get the message out that the anaerobic digester at Creed has been producing energy that we feed into the grid or use it on site since it opened in 2006. Our energy production has greatly improved as we've got better at managing the process. In the last 3 or 4 years, we're generating a lot more electricity, and we could do a lot more for no cost if we get more feedstock. So yeah, so to answer your question, I would like to say yes, we will guarantee we'll do that, but I have to prove the business case sort of beforehand.
Thank you very much for that. That's very interesting. I think there is definitely a campaign message there to get out to people, and I suppose it's the kind of thing that could go through schools, because a sort of nagging power of particularly younger children to parents would be a good way to go with that. They can be very zealous in these things and making sure their families are participating. But I just thought, looking at the materials from Zero Waste Scotland, that that must be factored in to the costs if they're able to do it in some authorities. But I wasn't aware that it would generate the ability the more people used it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions for Mr. MacLeod. Some time ago, we spoke about a bottle deposit scheme. Do you have any update on that and when it'll be rolled out in the Western Isles? And my second question was related to 6.12, where training options continue to be investigated to increase the pool of qualified PCV drivers. Bit of a wee update on that, if we have one as well. David?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The first one, the deposit return scheme for drinks containers, it's really any drinks containers apart from HTP, the sort of whitish milk bottle containers are all going to be covered by the deposit return scheme. That's planned. It's not even planned. There's a decision made that it's going to start on the 16th of August this year. There'll be a 20 pence charge on every one of these containers at point of sale, and the recovery of that 20 pence will require the return of the container back to a return point. I've been in communication with both Zero Waste Scotland and Circularity Scotland, who are the scheme administrator, to try and get an idea of where the return points are going to be in the Western Isles. We know that some of the supermarket sites will have what they call a reverse vending machine. So basically, you put your container in, and you either get a receipt or it goes onto some sort of card. But it's very unclear as to how this is going to work in the Western Isles. Myself and others from the island councils have been lobbying them to say, we all want this to work. It's got advantages for us if we can get this material out of the bins, and some of those who don't participate in recycling the way they should are the ones that are probably more likely to want to get their money back. If you buy a 12-pack of cans of juice, that's £2.40 you're paying extra. So you'll be wanting to get that £2.40 back. But at the moment, the information coming from Circularity Scotland is that it's definitely going ahead, and we'll let you know when it happens where all these points are going to be. So there is a wee bit of time, but it's not very clear how it's going to work in the islands. The other point, yeah, we are still looking to see whether either through an apprenticeship scheme of some sort that we can support access to PCV training. It was sort of delayed by the whole COVID situation, and we've only really just started discussions again. It's not as easy as I thought it would be, because some of the pots of funding are have sort of restricted access, but we are quite keen to do something along that.
Thank you, Chair. My question is regards salt storage at 1110. It was fairly apparent during the intense curating period that salt supplies were running low, but particularly on Barra.
No change in alcohol codic.
Okay.
I was calling me.
Yeah, well,
Aye.
I guess you can put.
Aye, okay.
I was asking about is there any update on the generator for Sacred Heart House?
Yes, almost.
Yes, we've unfortunately had some delays, as you're probably aware of, during the process. One of them is that the availability of suppliers is very short. So we've been working on again getting our pre-tender estimates more accurate. There will be increased costs. We can't cover these, so it's intended to deliver. It's probably going to be June, July now before it'll get delivered. But again, I know there's a desired have in place for this winter, but I think all I can promise now is that it'll be in place for next winter.
News makara me keisem could do you solve the citrus negas, like the food to gemar.
Thank you very much, Chair. Most observant, Doctor, if I may say. I'm not a member of your committee. I was wondering, when we were having the discussion on vehicles and hydrogen, whether there was any scope for using current local wind farms to produce hydrogen to extend the possible use of hydrogen in our own vehicles.
Thank you, Chair. There is a fairly big hydrogen project that will use local wind farms. What we're looking at in the short term is almost like a gap filling project that will allow us to extend the use of the diesel hydrogen hybrid setup, and also the funding bid we have in at the moment is looking at setting up in partnership with UHI to provide training opportunities. UHI are the only further education facility in Scotland that are providing recognised hydrogen technician courses for maintenance and work on hydrogen equipment. So for us to work with them and also give us an opportunity to increase our hydrogen production capacity out at Creed using the green energy that's there would be a good stepping stone. But I think the bigger projects are probably 4 or 5 years away. But at least that would move us to be in a position to take advantage of locally produced hydrogen on a bigger scale once it's free to us.
Thank you very much indeed. I wanted to ask one other question. When you were discussing taking forward the whole idea of net zero and the fact that we might have to work with like the Western Isles Health Board and others in terms of making sure that buildings were suitably prepared for that kind of scenario. I have advocated over the years that the best thing we can do with this building is to knock it down. And what we should be looking at is to build a purpose-built building, and all of these organizations get together to build the purpose-built building. And you're already working on bringing different organizations into this building. So I think, you know, there is a principle agreed there. And it would be far better to have a purpose-built building than to try and insulate this particular fella, I would have thought.
Alan?
In an ideal world, I agree with you. However, it's going to be very much dependent on funding. There's more of a desire through the Investment Commission work that repurposing of buildings is a preferred option. Of course, you'd have to go through the pros and cons on each individual site. So it's work that we would intend to do over coming years to look at what the options are for our main sites. It would be great to be able to have an all singing, all dancing, custom-made site that everybody lives in perfect harmony in. However, I think we'll work towards that, whether it's within the foreseeable future or not.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think the vision that Councillor McCormick sets out there is the correct one, and that is the logical consequence of our approach to an integrated services model of delivery for the Western Isles. That would be best delivered in a purpose-built building. We have tried to create that very successfully, I should say, by having organisations share this building with us. But the future, I think, of public services, as we all know, is in place-based integration, and that would require some thought to be given to the location of these integrated services. So I think it's a vision of which the Corley shouldn't lose sight. Thank you, Chair.
Ronald?
Thank you for letting me in again, Chair. It was just Councillor McNeill alluded to it briefly in his first question about paragraph 1110, options for salt storage being reconsidered. Could the Director elaborate further on that?
Well, I think Has getting source to Michael is my route is in on an ocean.
Yep, that's fine with you. Okay.
Thanks, Chair, for letting me in again. It's a question to David. I'm sorry, before I let him off too easily, but it's to do with the fleet at the present time. It's an aging fleet. I saw one just passing my house 2 days ago, spluttering quite. I'm not saying that it's on the way out, but well, as a matter of fact, I was spluttering as well because I was feeding sheep on the other side of the road. So it's to do with the age of the fleet and what we're going to do in the interim, because we're going to the buses we're going to need them in the future, because it looks very much as if we're going to go down to net zero rather than walking on ponies and horses. We will be dependent very much on the buses because that's the targets anyway. But it's the age of the fleet at the present time and how you're looking to replenish that fleet or redo the fleet, because as I take it, maybe you'll agree with me that the fleet is aging.
David?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just clarify. I presume you mean the Bustnacorla fleet rather than.
Yes, I wouldn't be going into private.
No, just rather than.
I know you're a man of multi-talented, but
rather than the refuse collection vehicles, which is again a Corla fleet, but slightly differently managed. We are aware that the Optior Solos are approaching the end of their life. It's more complicated than the bin lorries because Bus na Corla has to bid for work. So the lifespan of the vehicles don't always match up with the contract lengths. So if we were in a position where we knew we were getting the contract the next time round, we'd be looking at orders for replacing vehicles just now. Because that's not the case, and because we've still got a number of years, we're looking at options to see what we can do to sort of fill the gap in a way that doesn't tie us in a difficult financial position, because we're in the sort of halfway through a contract. So we are looking at that. We are aware that although we bought them new and they've been fairly decent vehicles, ideally we would like to replace them. What's a wee bit challenging more so just now is that if you look at what's available from the likes of Optior, they tend to be going down the route of either hybrid, which is part diesel, part electric, or full electric as being the way they're going, which means that they're much more expensive than they were, as you've already said, but not necessarily of great advantage to us because we don't have air quality issues. That these vehicles are now aimed at that market. So it is a bit of a challenge, but we have started looking at options for that, and hopefully we'll bring something back later this year.
John Crichton.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very briefly, and not to detain you longer. Just in terms of the buses and the way we operate our buses, is there a possibility we could explore adapting maybe one bus to be run on hydrogen to see how it would work and how that could make our fleet more efficient? I know there's an example Mr. McInnes could give of how there's a pilot project in the fishing industry. So maybe that could be replicated to maybe adapting and exploring how we could use hydrogen to make our service more efficient and meet our net zero targets. I know that's a sore point for some members, but I think it would contribute to that.
I think the secret to moving forward in terms of hydrogen is to have access to locally produced hydrogen. Until we've got that and it's reliable, it does restrict what we can do. It's a lot easier to strap a hydrogen tank to a bin lorry because it's an open chassis. Retrofitting hydrogen tanks to a bin lorry is much more challenging. So you'll be looking at probably a new installation. Even the hydrogen buses, the MIDI buses, the hydrogen ones that have been used in the likes of Aberdeen, they are primarily designed for urban use. So they tend to do much lower average speeds, have suspension that's designed for that, and probably in a day like this, driving a vehicle with hydrogen tanks on the roof across the Barvas Moor might be a bit interesting to say the least. So it's something we are aware of. We're keeping an eye on. We're looking at potential for fuel cell vehicles going forward if we can get the funding and if we've got access to hydrogen. But there's no obvious on the buses side. There's no real obvious way of saying, well, we can do that as a sort of halfway house, but we can on the HGVs. It's working quite well. I think Glasgow City have they're embarking on a process of using hydrogen a lot more. Their gritter lorries are going over to the hybrid, the same ideas we've had for a while on our bin lorry, because they see that as what they refer to as a range critical vehicle. In other words, if you're out doing gritting in the middle of the night and it's -8 degrees and it's snowing, you don't want to run out of battery and you don't want to run out of fuel. So that gives you the security of that. So I think that's similar to what we need, but just across the board.
Jonathan?
Just following on from what Councillor Crichton was saying, you know, the CLLD programme that Corla was running in this current year, there was a pilot available that was advertised for all industries in the Western Isles to apply for this catalytic converter, you know, with hydrogen, which is used very successfully, I must say, on buses in the Glasgow area. They have converted or added some to the buses there. And right across the UK, we've had an application through from 3 different types of vessels that are different consumption use. And in fact, one application came in from Harris for a diesel pickup to see what would happen. So it's obvious that systems are in place all around the UK. On the emissions side, you're talking about 70% reduction in emissions, and on the fuel consumption side, you're talking about in the region of an average of 15% saving in fuel costs. In addition to that, you know, the engines are in far better condition and need less servicing after. And that's what all the tests have shown. And the company that's doing it, last week they were over in Argentina, so they must be doing something. So I think this pilot should show that in the Western Isles, at least we're trying something, and the fishing industry is having a go. And that, in fact, the one in Harris has a turbine himself, so he's looking at what he can do on the hydrogen collection as well. So it's good that that started in the Western Isles.
Well, something you asked today, David.
If I can we then follow that up? Perhaps explore some possibilities.
Well, I'm talking about David. Flickers to you. Background, we came on David.
Yeah, well, there is a problem with this system in that the evidence is primarily anecdotal. When it was launched in the UK, the advertising authorities pulled it because of unsubstantiated data. And I'm not aware of anybody in the fleet industry that has any confidence in the data that's produced. It's not to say that if it subsequently gets full accreditation, that it's not something that we would look at, but the evidence is not strong from from in terms of, if it did everything that it said for the reasons that it said, then there would be hard evidence to back that up, because this has been on the market for probably best part of 15 years, but that hasn't happened. There's a lot of people that put it in and say it works really well, but nobody can actually say that's what, it's for the reason that it's saying. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm not convinced, and I haven't got the I haven't got anything to back that up from any fleet manager that I've spoken to, and I have done a bit of work on this.
Well, we've had a local example there from Mr. McInnes, and an invitation gone out to various industries to take part in a possible pilot scheme. It's worth exploring, surely, going forward. I know that David is not very enthusiastic about it, but I think we could have a look at it anyway, surely.
Just to conclude, the ones that have been issued with a grant for it, there will be a tracking system, in place on all those that have fitted it, and the results will be available. And seeing the council are running with the CLLD programme, that'll be available to the authority once the pilot project finishes, and we can discuss it later then.
So, Commission Sewley, David.
Yeah, I'm happy to keep an eye on it. As I said, if it's properly validated, then it's something that we would certainly consider. But at the moment, that seems to be what's lacking.
Sigur Hallam, I'm speaking. I'm taking your horror at the glue.
Having read,
Mouse is on route again was on
Right.
carbon footprint that
I
could
just
bicycle.
I support David in that because you can have evidence, but the evidence that comes from this is from the supplier himself or the person themselves who's going to Argentina to sell it. So one has to watch what evidence we have, and that's what David is doing. He is. I would come up with this as a skeptic, all right. But anyway, my skepticism is that it hasn't got hard data. And if you haven't got hard data to back it up, rather than just the people who are producing it, then one have to be watchful. And I think David is quite correct in being cautious. The data, though, is from the firm that's doing it. That's fair enough. That's fair enough. If you can have that data, that's fair enough. But the data has got to be more than just one firm.
Right, as je look at undige, misschien het David trug veel meer het breekbekken is. Als je je oprukken kan maken, je duw. Leef wordt boeilijk undige en aanschouwst van je. Zijn bekken op is de gunnigen is. Bors na galien, en gusper alleen is zo'n pech na comedy voor listen is, maar bors na galien. Goeie een gunje boeil, gewel na haan an fascríomh ga dianver, bechge sin een áisk san alles, ach ma ha kisten an a daimh die fascríomh ga sin an a dianver. An áisk seo san fisrige a mínige ghost, dus le molly en goed sabertjoch pust maar 3 bliana, agus fisrige mo áisk bliana an nech enemiche. Bíní kenjoch moesten is an áisk agus fiski frikli a kisten sabi. Kenjik.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and just direct you to Appendix 1 of the report, where it has the recommendations from the external audit firstly, and it's that these actions within that progress report have been completed. There is other things that didn't come in as recommendations but observations, so we'll continue to work through these things. This report also provides a further update on proposals for improvements over at Miavik. In UIG, the report from the designated person contains options to try and improve safety for all users and visitors in Miavik, and it's quite a congested area. I had hoped, and myself and the designated person had hoped to meet with users by the end of January, but that hasn't happened yet. I'm hoping that will be in the next couple of weeks that we'll be meeting with users to to implement this plan. What I would add on this also is that historically our harbours have primarily been fishing ports, and much like Miavik, many of them now serve several different industries, and it's something that we have to be aware of, that all these industries have competing needs for the limited space that is available. The likes of Callan and places like that have become just almost a victim of their own successes as they expand, and just the places need more infrastructure to go with it and more parking and things like that. We have the DP, the designated person, will be looking at used harbours this year, and will come back with findings and recommendations later in the year in terms of, I would expect things similar to what we have at Miavik, but hopefully it'll be a simpler process now that we've gone through it at Miavik for the other places. One final thing before I take questions is just an update on just for the committee in terms of questions Councillor McNeill asked last time in regards to Ardvenish and down in Barra, that we had to look at things. We've had added additional fenders to the pier at Ardvenish, but I think as I'd said last time, there is work that needs to be done, but it's a larger scale piece of work, and so the engineer will be carrying out a full structural assessment down there at some point in the future. So hopefully that won't be too long. And there's also a couple of other jobs have gone out in terms of potholes. That's gone out, but just waiting for it to be completed. Happy to take any questions on anything from members.
Yeah, certainly I welcome the report, and particularly, with the designated person as the recommendations is moving forward with Miavik in particular, because there's many other areas around the Western Isles, that's in a similar situation, and action needs to be taken, because it's clear from a risk point of view that the Corla are exposed if something goes wrong, if proper systems of particularly with forklifts and other vehicles are working along with walk-peak pedestrians going on the harbours. And I think the designated person is highly qualified, is independent, and comes across with a very accurate feedback on what's required and the way forward. And you know yourself, Chair, in Eust, you're hearing similar problems, at the busy harbours in particular. And I welcome the fact that this report and the recommendations are before us, and that the necessary action is taken before we're, as a Corla and a harbour authority, exposed to what could be. And he makes reference in the report, not if an accident happens, but when. So the current systems that fishery piers run up at harbours need to be addressed and tidied up, and I welcome this report.
Chynnig, wrthon ni ti a column ar wrth i Kira Cwtioch gachaf.
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you, Councillor McInnes. Yeah, you're absolutely right that we have to extend this towards when we work on the principle of as low as possible with regards to the risk, but as comes with Miavig, it comes at a cost. So I think that's what we have to be mindful of. A bit like the ideal position with regard to this building, that it's a bit the same with the harbours. To get to the ideal position in terms of everything would cost many hundreds of thousands and millions. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the report, and I would like to argue what Councillor McInnes says. But thank you for the work done. This I know it's a very hard job, limited budgets, and there's a lot to be done. You mentioned potholes and forklifts, and it's not the normal thing that you should be really working with. You should be looking at the pier side of things, but it's all important for the fishermen, and so thank you, and we look forward to more progress being done.
Alan.
Thanks. Just in the points being made, I mean, these reports are very useful to us as a Corla and as officers to see what the picture is in front of us. The same reports will be undertaken at other facilities, and it'll then come back for prioritisation. As you're all aware, there's very limited resources we have for capital and revenue. So there will be an element of prioritisation of what we can physically do over the future. And I think this information will be really useful to actually setting these priorities.
Geistig dyn sy'n biela. Daniel. Rogora gyda'r chynnig ar ôl.
Daniel.
Dafra. Yr bwyl a gyndych anawys gyhawst tanier. Daflyf. Oes sy'n yn esg y cwsbyr y sia plan y cochiawn yn nilain. Anawys sio aminich y orsdys re lesach y plan y con a hala person cochiawn yn nilain. Bini Linda Honig yn ysyn anawys agos ffricti I Kishton sy'n bi. Linda.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. There's an update for the committee since the report was written. Transport Scotland have prioritised and now published the first element of the island's connectivity plan, which is a draft for consultation of the long-term plan for vessels and ports on the Clyde and Hebrides and Northern Isles networks. That draft plan sets a key network-wide objective established following stakeholder engagement, where the top priority identified was to improve resilience and reliability. And the KPI is to reduce the average age of the Chifs and NIFs fleet to around 15 years by the end of the decade from the average age in 2022 of around 23 years. The draft plan was circulated as an advance copy to a key stakeholders group for initial feedback, and this was provided to Transport Scotland last week in consultation with the chair and vice chair of the committee. After considering the initial feedback received, a final draft of the long-term plan will then be published for full public consultation in early 2023. And a further report will be brought back to the committee for your review and your input. I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Stegever, Kestek Dennis bit Linda Timicha Lopez Gemak Kutramacha Shaw. Wanneer? En mijn weg kunt solus be. Oké, tagpelegt. Ash gerust de shit ik Linda.
Thank you, Chair.
Wel poeilijk kundige normaal in ik 3 punten hun. Nou, tagpelegt. Gwrs is in een echte kuspere sheikh, policy is asbestos agus planarianer. Hannar shaw shide gunte die policy asgrute is asbestos agus planarianer. Ik bergige naas fisker en duw kunju comedy policy agus stores. Dini kalmach kunnig naas agus flikti kisten sabi.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have much to add to the report. It's an update of the policy which we're looking for your approval for. Thank you, Chair.
Kistek Danya. Ja. Voor de verloeie committee wil poel een kundige is een value ek 3 punten hun. Verleef. Woes in eerste kuspere hoog groten. En naast je zo'n visserige is een minige oorstes die proces gen rienig zouden roten. Is het door Tsjechen torien waar ask innewe bleven als roten. Daar willen het zijn, daar willen het ze gaan. Dini column mag geen visionaris is fictie kistens zijn been. We dus van pine dosje halen. Is een vaak kon halen dosje.
Thank you, Chair. This is quite a detailed report. It's annual status and options report undertaken by technical staff to do with the all roads related infrastructure. Colin has been heavily involved in this work and will answer any questions for you. But just to highlight that there are levels of investment mentioned in this report, which are difficult to actually match with the future capital and revenue budgets that we're likely to have. I'll pass over to Colin to give any other key highlights on this report, but it is very technically detailed, and please ask Colin any questions that you have on it.
Colin.
Thank you, Chair. As Callum said, the numbers that are mentioned in the report do likely outstrip the potential budgets that we will get, but I think it's worth looking at them in detail. The carriageway surfaces, excuse me, is one of the largest assets that we have in the Corla. Obviously requires a significant amount of maintenance. Nationally, the road condition index is the measurement that's used to gauge the trends in road condition. This is calculated using a combination of partial surveys that are done for classified roads every 2 years. We cover the whole classified network, and over 4 years, the whole unclassified network is covered. So you're basically, the RCI number is calculated using information from potentially certain parts of the network, which is 4 years old. This is combined with logistical problems in recent years of getting the survey equipment on to cover the whole network due to COVID and other issues. There is a degree of uncertainty in the RCI figure that we have at the moment, covering the last 2 years. So just draw that to your attention. However, we are currently trialing a system known as Visalas Road AI, which is hopefully by the end of the summer, we should have a full picture of our whole network, basically, for road condition, although it's not as technically detailed, the information that is gathered as the SRMCS surveys. It will, however, back up that information and give us a better indication of where we might want to target our limited resources on the carriageway network. Other than that, I don't want to bang on about this too much, but carriageways are important, but there's also a significant amount of other work that needs to be done with the likes of street furniture, street lighting, road markings, structures. All of these require maintenance and require to be considered over the long term. And much of our stock, certainly street lighting stock, is aging. Street lighting columns are significantly aging. There's a large amount of them that are non-galvanized steel columns, which are now beyond their expected service life. So these are things that need to be invested in to reduce risk of collapse and the claims that would go along with that potentially. Also, the luminaire stock within streetlights is aging, and a lot of it's becoming obsolete. So we now have to, in certain areas, replace with LED units rather than just a small lamp bulb. You're having to replace the whole head, and that has a cost and revenue. So without capital investment, this is all added pressure to our revenue budget. So sorry, I can't paint a prettier picture, but it is where we are. Happy to take any questions.
Kirsten Dennis and me.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not a member of your committee. We've just had a very serious picture painted for us in terms of the situation in the islands with regard to roads and infrastructure. And what I'm wondering is, how do we get the message across to those who should be giving us the funding to do this, that we are reaching a very, very serious situation? I mean, the one thing that's brought to my attention more than anything else as a councillor is the state of our roads. And my answer always is, I'm sorry, we can't do very much about that because we don't have the resource. I was very impressed, mind you, earlier this year when a pothole on North Street was filled before I'd even reported it. So people are beginning to read my mind, which is rather troubling. But however, back to my serious question here. How on earth do we get the message across to the powers that be that we are in a very, very serious situation? Yeah.
As Collins pointed out, it is a serious issue that faces not only ourselves in the Western Isles, but across the country as well. It's a nationally recognised format that we follow in reporting road condition, and Colin has highlighted some of the discrepancies that could arise into that if you're comparing the road condition index, because it is based on an average cost of repair as well. So the costs to us in the Western Isles are likely to be much higher than in mainland Scotland. It's a valid question. What do we do for the future, and how do we highlight this to government? So in the past, we've written to government highlighting those concerns. We will continue to do so, and I think it is going to be very topical across the whole country as well. We will be considering reports on capital expenditure later on in the budget setting process as well, where you'll see that there are so many competing demands as well for the money we have available. So I can only reiterate what Colin has said as well. We can't paint a pretty picture for you just now. It's a deteriorating picture in terms of our asset condition in the context of many other competing demands as well for money and services. So I'm sorry, Councillor McCormick, I don't have a direct answer. This is what we're doing, but we will continue to make the point known to yourselves and to Scottish government and other funders of the condition of our infrastructure. And it was disappointing that we didn't get anything out of the Levelling Up Fund, which may have helped with some of this. But it's a much wider picture as well, and we'll hope to continue to seek whatever funding sources that we can.
I wondered if this report itself is shared with the national government, for example, you know, to point out just exactly how serious the situation is.
Yes, Hollis.
It is. I mean, it is reported nationally through the local government benchmarking figures. Unfortunately, some of these go a bit unnoticed, and sometimes it's reported as a good news story, where we're one of the better performing councils in the country because we don't spend as much as others per kilometre on our roads network. It's not because we manage them or maintain them any better, it's because we're spending less money on them. We have less money to spend. But I think Collins highlighted in the report as well that we're one of the worst performing in terms of road condition index in Scotland. These figures are consistent nationally as well. The process is consistent. So these can be fed to Scottish Government in a comparative way to say this is where we sit within Scotland as a whole. But I think it is a national problem. I mean, people may come here and think our roads are better than they are in the centre of Glasgow, for instance. But it's comparable to the size of our area, the expanse of our network as well. So it is a general national issue which we will continue to promote.
Yes, Hollis.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this report is a good report. A lot of work's gone into it, but it is alarming and concerning. I think when we look at the state of our country roads, particularly, I know we've got issues in the town as well, but given the volume of calls that I get as a local member, and you know, across the whole piece of the corner, I would say a very, very high portion, up probably 70% of them to do with roads and gridding and various issues to do with roads. My question really is, where are we? Are we nearly at a stage now where we are not able to undertake any improvements to our roads due to financial constraints? I know we're coming up to budget settings in the next few weeks, but you know, we're patching roads. We're doing a good job of the patching at the moment, but we're beyond the patching. I think in some areas need a lot of overlay, which costs a lot of money. And when are we going to reach the crisis point when we say to our electorate, sorry, we can't do anything else to our roads? Are we close to that now? That's a question I'm asking.
It's a concerning place we find ourselves in just now. We'll know after the budget setting how much we will have to spend capital wise and revenue wise on roads. Just now we have no money for capital overlay. We're spending our capital money on bridge repairs and on surface dressing on an annual basis. The surface dressing is quite effective in that it protects our roads, and we get a much larger coverage of our roads network with that process. But you're right, there are areas which are beyond surface dressing and probably going to be beyond pothole repairs. We'll have to prioritise whatever capital monies we have on that basis, and we may be looking like in previous years, do we hit the whole network with whatever resources that we have in 1 year to get that consistency? We've been 3 years now without being able to afford overlay money. That's because we used the money up front in the last investment period. I think that worked well to a certain extent in that we got about 30% more for our money than we would have if we spread it over the 5 years. We may want to look at that again, looking at the road's condition as a one-off over the coming year and saying, well, when's the best time to invest? I can't really answer your question directly. I know it was a very direct question, what position we're in. It's not a comfortable position as far as the road's condition is looking like. We'll do our best we can with the resources that are made available to us, and we can report that back when we've done the full condition assessment, just post-winter, and the work that Colin's doing as well. So we'll be in a better position then when we look at the entire network condition and the amount of money available to advise on what we can do with it.
Cystic dynnes méle. Neil, we're boile gundig an náis gehorst van jaar. Ja, tak blif. Gaishin cusper an ug dich hun die agus ga ie kan a dia ver ik dead in a conio. Agus le shen close shin go cus. Agus as tritiek. Zo as vis an ástoffe geit. Han is een mur kistik dynnes a bi. Ceart is an ask seo, well. Wanneer trefan me ha het sin an est an a diaver son pech is cusper an a lug dich hun diek ga an a diaver. Behoort